He prepared our kids for my funeral while I was still alive. What should I do? Sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for are the ones who destroy us from the inside out. I did something 3 months ago that still keeps me awake at night, staring at the ceiling while my husband sleeps peacefully beside me. I can hear him breathing, that steady rhythm I used to find comforting. Now just a reminder of how little he knows about what I've done, what I've become. I keep asking myself if I was protecting my children, or if I crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. I don't know if I was right or wrong, and I need you to tell me. I am 34 years old, a registered nurse who works night shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, and until recently, I believed that love could conquer anything. My husband Marcus is 36, a construction foreman who's been out of work for 8 months due to a back injury. We have 3 children, Emma, who just turned 12 and carries the weight of our family's stress in her anxious brown eyes, Jake, our 10-year-old, who still believes his parents are superheroes, and little Sophie, who's 6 and asks why mommy cries in the shower. Our house is a modest 3-bedroom ranch that we bought when Marcus was making good money and I was working part-time. The mortgage payment seemed manageable then. Everything seemed manageable then. Now, the paint is peeling on the shutters. The washing machine makes a grinding sound that means it's dying. And there's a water stain on Sophie's bedroom ceiling that grows larger every time it rains. Marcus receives workers' compensation, but it's a fraction of his normal salary. My nursing income covers the basics, barely. We've been living on credit cards, borrowing against tomorrow for today's necessities. The kind of debt that feels like quicksand, pulling you deeper with every struggle. But the real crisis wasn't financial. Money problems are external. They can be solved. What was killing me slowly was watching my family disintegrate from the inside. Marcus changed after his injury. Not just physically, though seeing him wince when he gets out of bed breaks something in me every time, but emotionally. He became withdrawn, angry, ashamed. He started drinking beer at 10 in the morning, telling me it helped with the pain. When Jake would ask him to throw a football in the backyard, Marcus would snap, "Can't you see Daddy's hurt?" The light would die in Jake's eyes, and I'd find myself making excuses, smoothing over the rejection, trying to be both parents. Emma started having panic attacks at school. The guidance counselor called to tell me she'd found Emma hyperventilating in the bathroom, convinced that our family was going to end up homeless. A 12-year-old shouldn't know words like foreclosure or bankruptcy. But Emma had overheard our late-night arguments about money and absorbed our fear like a sponge. Sophie began wetting the bed again, something she hadn't done since she was 4. She'd wake up crying, and I'd strip the sheets at 2 in the morning before my shift, running the washer even though we couldn't afford the water bill, because what choice did I have? Let my baby sleep in her own urine? I became the emotional dumping ground for everyone's pain. Marcus would rage about his uselessness, and I'd listen, offering comfort I didn't feel. Emma would cry about kids at school asking why her shoes were falling apart, and I'd promise new ones we couldn't afford. Jake would show me bruises from boys who called him poor trash, and I'd teach him to fight with words while dying inside. Sophie would ask why we couldn't go to McDonald's anymore, and I'd make up games about eating peanut butter sandwiches that made her giggle, even as my heart shattered. I was everyone's strength, but I was disappearing piece by piece. 3 months ago, I found the insurance papers. I'd been looking for our tax documents in Marcus's desk. We were behind on filing, behind on everything, when I found a manila folder marked Northwestern Mutual in his handwriting. Inside were policy documents for a life insurance plan I didn't know existed. A plan worth $250,000 on my life. My hands shook as I read the beneficiary information. Marcus Henderson, primary beneficiary. Emma, Jake, and Sophie Henderson, contingent beneficiaries. The policy was 6 months old, taken out right after his injury during those first weeks when I was working double shifts to keep us afloat, when I was too exhausted to notice he was making phone calls and signing papers. $250,000. Enough to pay off the mortgage, the credit cards, set aside college funds for the kids. Enough for Marcus to never have to work again if he managed the money carefully. I sat on our bedroom floor with those papers scattered around me, like puzzle pieces of a picture I didn't want to see. My husband had bet $250,000 on my death. I couldn't confront him immediately. I needed to understand what I was seeing, needed to know if there was an innocent explanation that my terrified mind was missing. So I began to pay attention in ways I hadn't before. Marcus had started encouraging me to take more shifts. "We need the money, baby," he'd say, stroking my hair as I protested that I was already working 50 hours a week. Just until I can get back to work. He'd kiss my forehead and tell me how much he appreciated my sacrifice, how he didn't deserve a wife like me. I noticed he'd stopped complaining when I drove alone to work at midnight through neighborhoods that had gotten rougher over the years. He used to worry, used to text me to make sure I arrived safely. Now, he was asleep when I left and asleep when I came home, and if I mentioned feeling unsafe, he'd remind me we needed every shift I could get. He'd started talking about my dangerous job around the kids, mentioning nurses who'd been attacked by patients, who'd caught infections, who'd died in car accidents driving home exhausted. "Mommy's job is so important," he'd tell them. "But it's scary too. We need to appreciate every day we have with her." Was he preparing them? Was he planting seeds so that when something happened to me, it would seem like an occupational hazard rather than something more sinister? I started having nightmares about car accidents, about being found dead in the hospital parking garage, about my children crying at my funeral while Marcus collected insurance money and played the grieving widower. I'd wake up in cold sweats, looking at the man sleeping next to me and wondering if he was dreaming of my death. My paranoia, because that's what I told myself it was, paranoia, drove me to do something I'd never imagined. I started researching my own medical records, looking for signs that someone might be slowly poisoning me. I'd been having strange symptoms for months. Fatigue that went beyond exhaustion from overwork, dizzy spells, nausea that seemed unrelated to anything I'd eaten. I'd attributed it all to stress, to the impossible weight of holding our family together. But now I wondered. I ran blood tests on myself in the hospital lab, telling my supervisor I was concerned about anemia. Everything came back normal. I tested my coffee cup, my water bottle, even my shampoo, convinced I'd find traces of something that didn't belong. Nothing. Either Marcus wasn't poisoning me, or he was smarter about it than my amateur detective work could detect. But the insurance policy remained real. The way he looked at me had changed. I was sure of it now. Sometimes I'd catch him staring with an expression I couldn't read. Something cold and calculating that disappeared the moment he realized I was watching. Emma started asking strange questions around this time. "Mom, what would happen to us if you died?" she asked one evening while I was helping her with homework. "Would we have to move? Would Dad take care of us by himself?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Honey, why are you asking about that?" "Dad said we need to think about these things. He said your job is dangerous and we should be prepared." She looked up at me with those wise, worried eyes. I told him I don't want to think about it, but he said that's immature. My blood turned to ice water. Marcus was having these conversations with our 12-year-old daughter? Preparing her for my death? That night, I found Jake in his room, unusually quiet. When I asked what was wrong, he burst into tears. "Daddy said if something happens to you, he might not be able to afford to keep me in baseball." He sobbed. "He said I need to understand that everything costs money, and without your job, we might lose everything." I held my 10-year-old son while he cried about losing his mother and his baseball team in the same breath, and something fundamental cracked inside my chest. Even little Sophie had been affected. She'd been drawing pictures of our family, but in every one, I was missing. When I asked her about it, she shrugged with the casual cruelty of childhood. "Daddy said, maybe you'll go to heaven soon like Grandpa did. Then you won't have to work so much, and you won't be tired anymore." My husband was psychologically preparing our children for my death. He was normalizing it, making it seem inevitable, even merciful. He was grooming them to accept it. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't wake up every day wondering if my husband wanted me dead. I couldn't watch my children being emotionally manipulated in preparation for losing their mother. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal while feeling like a walking target. But I also couldn't just leave. Where would I go with 3 kids and no savings? Marcus would get custody. He'd play the victim, the injured worker whose wife abandoned the family during their darkest hour. The children wouldn't understand. They'd blame me for tearing apart the only stability they'd ever known. And what if I was wrong? What if the insurance policy was just Marcus being responsible, planning for the worst-case scenario like any good husband would? What if my exhaustion and stress had twisted innocent actions into something sinister? I needed proof. I needed to know for certain what kind of man I'd married, what kind of father was raising my children. So, I decided to disappear. Not really, of course, but I needed Marcus to believe I was dead. I needed to see how he'd react, how he'd treat our children, what he'd do with the insurance money. I needed to know if I was living with a man who wished I was gone, or a man who would be destroyed by losing me. I spent weeks planning it. I'd worked in the hospital long enough to know how death investigations worked, how insurance companies verified claims, what kind of evidence they'd require. I'd also seen enough medical emergencies to know how to fake one convincingly. The plan was complex, but not impossible. I would stage my own disappearance in a way that looked accidental, but would buy me time to disappear and observe Marcus's reaction. I'd use my medical knowledge to create symptoms of a heart attack, leave evidence of my distress, and vanish in a way that would suggest I was gone somewhere my body couldn't be immediately found. I started by creating a trail of health concerns. I scheduled appointments with our family doctor, complaining of chest pains and shortness of breath. I made sure Marcus knew about these appointments, watched him process the information. Did he look concerned or hopeful? I researched medications that could simulate cardiac distress without causing permanent damage. I studied cases of people who'd disappeared and been presumed dead. I learned about insurance investigation timelines and legal declaration of death procedures. Most importantly, I arranged for a safe place to hide. My sister Lisa lived 3 states away in Colorado. She knew about our financial problems, but not about my suspicions regarding Marcus. I told her I was considering leaving him, that I needed somewhere to go if things got worse. She offered her guest room without hesitation. I chose a Tuesday night in November. Marcus was taking pain medication that made him sleep deeply, and the children would be at school the next day when my death was discovered. I'd worked a shift the night before, so my being tired and stressed wouldn't seem unusual. I left work at 7 a.m. as usual, but didn't come home immediately. Instead, I drove to a remote parking area near the river, a place where joggers sometimes found bodies after people had jumped from the bridge upstream. I left my car there with the keys in the ignition, my purse on the passenger seat, and my hospital badge visible on the dashboard. Inside the car, I scattered the empty bottles of heart medication I'd taken from the hospital disposal bin. I'd consumed just enough of the actual medication to create symptoms: rapid heartbeat, sweating, anxiety, that would be detected in blood work if anyone tested the car for evidence. I left a note on my phone, typed but not sent, that read, "I can't do this anymore. The pressure is killing me. Take care of our babies." Then I walked to where Lisa was waiting in her car, hidden in the woods nearby. I'd called her the night before, finally telling her everything: the insurance policy, my suspicions, my plan. She thought I was losing my mind, but she loved me enough to help me find out the truth. We drove to Colorado in her car, taking back roads, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, kept my head down, paid for everything in cash that Lisa had withdrawn from her account over the previous weeks. By the time we reached her house, my car had been found. Lisa had a laptop, and within hours of my disappearance, we were monitoring local news websites and social media for information about the case. The story developed exactly as I'd predicted. Local nurse missing, presumed dead, after car found near river. The article mentioned that I'd been under significant stress due to my husband's injury and the family's financial difficulties. It quoted Marcus saying I'd been working too many hours, had been worried about money, and had recently complained of health problems. He sounded like a devastated husband whose wife had been pushed to the breaking point. But I watched the video of his press conference with the police, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. Marcus looked appropriately grief-stricken for the cameras, but there were moments when he thought no one was looking, when he was adjusting his shirt or clearing his throat, where his expression was different. Relieved, almost excited. When a reporter asked about life insurance, he stammered slightly before saying he'd have to look into those matters, but that his only concern was finding his wife and supporting his children through this tragedy. The stammering might have seemed like emotional distress to most viewers. To me, it looked like someone trying to hide anticipation. The hardest part wasn't hiding in Lisa's guest room, eating takeout food and dyeing my hair black in her bathroom sink. The hardest part was watching my children grieve from a distance while I couldn't comfort them. Lisa had set up multiple fake social media accounts so we could monitor what was happening at home. Emma had stopped going to school and was sleeping in my bed every night. Jake had quit baseball and spent most of his time in his room. Sophie was asking everyone when Mommy was coming back. and no one seemed able to explain death to a 6-year-old in a way that made sense. I watched Marcus struggle with single parenthood, ordering pizza every night, letting the laundry pile up, snapping at the kids when they cried for me. But I also noticed things that broke my heart in a different way. He held Sophie while she cried. He helped Jake with homework. He let Emma sleep in our bed without complaint. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the insurance policy was just practical planning, and Marcus was genuinely devastated by losing me. Maybe I'd destroyed our family based on paranoia and exhaustion-fueled delusions. I was about to call the police and confess everything when I saw the Facebook post. It was on a private group for men going through divorces and custody battles, a group Lisa found by pretending to be someone else and requesting access. Marcus had joined this group 3 weeks after my disappearance. His post was titled, "Starting Over After Tragedy," and it made my blood run cold. Lost my wife recently in what might have been suicide. Devastating for the kids and me, obviously, but I have to think about the future. She left us in serious debt and I'm disabled with a back injury. The life insurance will help, but I need advice on how to handle things. Should I sell the house and start fresh somewhere new? The kids are having trouble in school here anyway. Too many memories. Thinking maybe Florida or Arizona, somewhere with lower cost of living. Any advice on the best places to rebuild after losing a spouse? The responses were what you'd expect. Sympathy, practical advice, recommendations for specific cities. But Marcus's follow-up comments revealed so much more. The investigation should wrap up soon, and they'll declare her legally dead. Just waiting on some paperwork. I never thought I'd be a single dad, but maybe it's better this way. She was working herself to death anyway, literally killing herself trying to support us. Now the kids and I can start fresh without all that stress. Insurance company seems like they'll pay out without much trouble. She left plenty of evidence about her mental state. I almost feel guilty about how much easier life might be with the money, and without the constant worry about bills. Thanks for all the advice, guys. You're right that kids are resilient. They'll adjust to a new city, new schools. Might be good for all of us to get away from everything that reminds us of her. He was planning to take my children away, not just emotionally, but physically, moving them across the country where I'd never find them, starting a new life built on insurance money from my supposed death. And the way he wrote about me, like I was a burden that had been lifted, a problem that had solved itself. There was no grief in those words, no love, no sense of loss, just relief and excitement about his new financial situation. I couldn't let him take my children. I couldn't let him profit from my supposed death and erase me from their lives completely. But I also couldn't just show up alive and expect everything to go back to normal. I'd committed fraud, faked my own death, put my children through hell. There would be legal consequences, and Marcus would use my actions against me in any custody battle. I needed a different approach. Lisa helped me create an anonymous email account and gather screenshots of Marcus's posts in the divorce group. We also had records of his insurance-related phone calls. She'd used her contacts in the tech industry to access our phone records legally. We documented everything, the timing of the insurance policy, his comments about my dangerous job, his posts about starting over. Then, I sent everything to the insurance company's fraud investigation department. The investigation moved quickly once they had evidence that the beneficiary might have been hoping for the policyholder's death. They froze the payout pending further review and launched their own inquiry into Marcus's behavior before and after my disappearance. But I still needed to come home. I needed to face my children, my husband, the consequences of what I'd done. I'd been dead for 6 weeks when I walked up to our front door on a Thursday afternoon. The kids would be getting off the school bus soon. Emma had finally returned to classes, according to the Facebook posts from other parents offering support. Marcus was in the living room, on his laptop, probably writing more posts about starting over in Arizona. He looked up when I opened the door with my key, and his face went through a series of expressions I'll never forget. Shock, fear, confusion, and then something like rage. "Sarah?" he whispered. "Hello, Marcus." For a long moment, we just stared at each other. He was thinner than when I'd left, his hair unwashed, wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in through the window 3 days earlier. The house smelled like pizza and desperation. "Where have you been?" he asked finally. "Everyone thinks you're dead. The police, the insurance company, the kids." His voice cracked on the last word, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine emotion or panic about his situation. I know, I said. I needed to find out who you really were. I needed to know if my husband wanted me dead. His face went white. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed him screenshots of his posts in the divorce group. Want to explain these? Or maybe we should start with the life insurance policy you took out on me without my knowledge? What followed was the most horrible conversation of my life. Marcus didn't deny any of it. He couldn't, with the evidence right there on my phone. Instead, he tried to justify it. The insurance policy was just being responsible after his injury. The posts in the group were just venting to people who understood stress. He'd never actually wanted me to die, he said. He'd just been overwhelmed by our financial situation and had started thinking about worst-case scenarios. But you weren't devastated when I disappeared, I pointed out. You were relieved. I was scared, he protested. I didn't know how to take care of the kids alone. I was just trying to stay positive, to think about solutions instead of falling apart. Solutions that involved taking the children away from everything they've ever known and starting over with insurance money? He couldn't answer that. He sat on our couch, the couch we'd bought together when we first moved into this house, where we'd held our babies and watched movies and planned our future, and put his head in his hands. I never meant for it to happen this way, he said finally. The money would have solved everything. The debt, the stress, the kids' future. I started thinking it might be better for everyone if I was dead. If you didn't have to suffer anymore, he said, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. You were losing yourself working those shifts, worrying about money, trying to hold everything together. I thought maybe it would be merciful. It was the most terrifying thing he could have said because part of it was true. I had been suffering. I had been exhausted and stressed and barely holding on. But the solution wasn't my death. It was support, help, partnership. Instead, my husband had decided that my life insurance payout was more valuable than my life. We were still talking, or rather, I was confronting Marcus while he made excuses, when the school bus pulled up outside. Through the window, I could see Emma helping Sophie off the bus, while Jake dragged his backpack behind him. They all looked smaller than I remembered, dimmed somehow, like someone had turned down the brightness on my beautiful children. I met them at the door. Emma saw me first and froze on the front steps, her face cycling through the same shock Marcus had shown. Mom, she whispered. I'm home, baby. She dropped her backpack and ran into my arms, sobbing against my chest, while Jake and Sophie stood behind her in confusion. Sophie didn't understand why everyone was crying. She was just happy to see me. Jake looked angry, hurt, like he couldn't decide whether to hug me or yell at me. Where were you? Emma demanded through her tears. Everyone said you were dead. They had people looking for your body in the river. I thought I'd never see you again. I held her tighter and looked over her head at Sophie, who was tugging on my shirt and asking why we were all crying when this was supposed to be happy. Jake stood apart from us, his jaw set in a way that reminded me heartbreakingly of Marcus. I was sick, I told them, using the story I'd prepared during the drive home. Very sick in my head, and I went away to get better. I'm sorry I scared you. I'm sorry I left you when you needed me. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. I had been sick with fear, sick with exhaustion, sick with the weight of holding our family together while it fell apart around me. I had needed help, though not the kind of help I'd sought. The police came that evening. Marcus had called them after the children were in bed, after we'd ordered their favorite Chinese takeout, and pretended to be a normal family having dinner together. I'd expected this. You can't fake your own death and just walk back into your life without consequences. I was arrested on charges of insurance fraud and filing a false police report. I spent the night in jail while Marcus stayed home with the kids, and I lay on that narrow cot wondering if I'd made everything worse by coming back. But the insurance company's investigation helped my case. They'd uncovered enough evidence of Marcus's suspicious behavior that the prosecutor was willing to consider a plea deal. The fraud charges were dropped in exchange for community service and restitution for the cost of the search efforts. The false report charge remained, but with a suspended sentence. Marcus wasn't charged with anything criminal. Hoping your spouse dies isn't illegal, Even taking out life insurance policies on them isn't illegal if you have an insurable interest. But the insurance company voided his policy and flagged him in their system. He'll never be able to get life insurance on me again. The legal consequences were nothing compared to what my actions did to our family. Emma started having panic attacks again, worse than before. The guidance counselor said she was terrified that I'd disappear again, that she checked my bed every morning to make sure I was still there. Jake's anger was harder to deal with. He felt betrayed by both of us. By Marcus for wanting me gone, and by me for leaving him when he needed his mother most. He started acting out at school, getting into fights, failing tests. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd just stare at me and say, "How do I know you won't leave again?" Sophie was the most resilient, but also the most heartbreaking. She started hoarding food in her room, hiding crackers and fruit snacks under her bed, in case Mommy goes away again and Daddy forgets to make dinner. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and crawl into bed with me, wrapping her little arms around my neck and whispering, "Don't go to heaven yet, okay?" And Marcus became a stranger. He moved into the guest room and spoke to me only when necessary about the children or household logistics. He'd lost weight, stopped taking care of himself, and had the hollow look of someone whose whole world had shifted. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me like he couldn't believe I was real. Other times, he looked at me like I was something dangerous, unpredictable. 6 weeks after my return, Emma's therapist suggested family counseling. She was worried about the children's anxiety levels and thought we needed professional help to rebuild trust and stability. Dr. Reeves was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who specialized in families dealing with trauma. She listened to our story without judgment, though I saw her eyebrows raise when Marcus admitted to taking out the life insurance policy without telling me, and again, when I explained how I'd faked my death to test his reaction. "You've both betrayed each other in fundamental ways," she said during our third session. "Marcus, you fantasized about your wife's death and made practical plans for your life without her. Sarah, you abandoned your children during a crisis to conduct an elaborate test of your husband's loyalty. Both of you prioritized your own emotional needs over your family's well-being." It was brutal to hear, but it was true. We'd both failed our children in catastrophic ways. "The question now," Dr. Reeves continued, "is whether you can rebuild trust and create a stable environment for Emma, Jake, and Sophie. That's going to require both of you to take full responsibility for your actions and commit to putting the children's needs first. Recovery isn't a straight line, and some damage might be permanent." Marcus started going to individual therapy to deal with his depression and the resentment that had built up during his months of disability. He also started medication for anxiety and chronic pain that didn't involve drinking beer at breakfast. I reduced my hours at the hospital and found a day shift position, even though it meant less money. The children needed me home more, needed the predictability of knowing where I was and when I'd be back. We started having family dinners every night. Not takeout, but meals I cooked, meals we ate together at the table while talking about school, and friends, and normal, ordinary things. Emma's panic attacks became less frequent with therapy and medication, but she still checked on me every morning. Jake's anger mellowed into a kind of watchful wariness. He loved me, but he didn't fully trust me yet. Sophie stopped hoarding food, but she still crawled into my bed most nights. Marcus and I started couples counseling in addition to family therapy. It was awkward and painful, sitting in that office twice a week and dissecting the ways we'd failed each other. But slowly, we began to understand how we'd gotten to such a dark place. His injury had left him feeling emasculated, useless, like a burden on his family. The financial pressure had made it worse, and somewhere in his depression, he'd started seeing me as both a martyr and a source of guilt. The life insurance policy had been a fantasy escape, a way to solve all our problems and free me from the burden of supporting everyone. My reaction had been driven by terror and exhaustion, but also by a need to know the truth about my marriage. I'd been living with a man I no longer trusted, sacrificing myself for a family that might not have valued my sacrifice. Faking my death had been extreme, but it had also been the only way I could think of to find out who Marcus really was when he thought I was gone. We're still in therapy, all of us. Individual sessions, couple sessions, family sessions. Our insurance only covers part of it, so we're in debt for that too. But it's debt that might actually save us instead of destroying us. Marcus went back to work 3 months ago. Light duty at first, but full-time now? His back still bothers him, but he's learned to manage the pain without drinking, and he's taking pride in providing for his family again. We've paid down some of our credit card debt and caught up on the mortgage. Emma is doing better in school and has made a new friend, a girl whose parents got divorced last year. They understand each other's anxiety about family stability. Jake joined a new baseball team and is talking to me again, really talking, not just answering questions with grunts. Sophie has started sleeping in her own bed most nights, though she still checks to make sure my car is in the driveway when she gets home from school. And Marcus and I, we're different. We'll always be different. You can't go through what we went through and come back unchanged. But we're talking to each other honestly for the first time in years. We're sharing the financial decisions, the parenting responsibilities, the emotional load of keeping our family functioning. I know now that Marcus never would have actually hurt me. His fantasy of my death was about escape from an impossible situation, not about wanting to murder his wife. But I also know that he'd gotten to a place where he could imagine being relieved by my death, and that knowledge will always be between us. He knows that I'm capable of extreme actions when I feel cornered, that the woman he married isn't just a selfless caregiver, but someone who will fight for her family in ways that might destroy it. That knowledge will always be between us too. So here I am, 6 months later, still asking myself, and now asking you, was I wrong to fake my death to see if my husband wanted me gone? I traumatized my children. I committed fraud. I shattered trust. Yet I also forced into the open a truth that was poisoning us. Marcus had already pictured life without me. Our kids were being prepared for my absence. I was married to a man who, in his darkest thoughts, saw my death as relief. Maybe I should have confronted him directly. Maybe counseling could have saved us. But maybe without believing I was gone, Marcus never would have revealed the depth of his fantasies, and I never would have found the insurance policy or his plans to erase me. Every hug from Emma, every homework question from Jake, every sleepy curl of Sophie reminds me of the damage I caused, and the danger I may have prevented. There's one truth I've never admitted. The night before I disappeared, I found a private investigator's report on his computer. It tracked my shifts, routes, and habits in chilling detail. Was it premeditation, or the desperate act of a broken man? I never asked. So I carry both truths. I was right to be afraid, and wrong in how I acted. Both things can be true. 8 months have passed. We're still in therapy. There are good moments again. But the question never leaves me. So tell me, who's really in the wrong? Was it me for breaking my family in order to test his love? Or was it Marcus for finding mercy in my death instead of in my life? So tell me, who's really in the wrong? Because even now, when I look at him across the table, I can't tell if I'm sitting with my husband or with the man who once wished me gone. So please tell me, who's really in the wrong?